Hello, I'm Ila Sharavinsky. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we unpack the most riveting stories from the East. Tonight, we're delving into the recent drama in the Taiwan Strait, involving Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te, China's military maneuvers, and a visit from US lawmakers. So let's begin with the basics, shall we? Taiwan's newly inaugurated President Lai Ching-te recently extended an olive branch to China, expressing goodwill and a desire for cooperation. This sounds like a wholesome diplomatic gesture, right? Well, not so fast. Things are a little bit more intricate on the ground, a little bit more complex. So let's take a glance at our latest report to find out what's really going on.
A group of US lawmakers have visited Taiwan, signaling strong American backing for the island nation following extensive military drills conducted by China in the surrounding regions. The delegation, led by Michael McCall, chair of the US House Foreign Affairs Committee, met with Chinese officials, including the newly inaugurated President Lai Ching-te.
America is, and always will be, a reliable partner, and no amount of coercion or intimidation will slow down or stop the routine visits by the Congress to Taiwan.
The visit comes at a critical time as tensions between Taiwan and China continue to escalate due to Beijing's military maneuvers, which are widely viewed as an intimidation tactic against Taiwan's democratic governance, an accusation China openly confirms.
The military exercise is a necessary and a legitimate move to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity, crack down on Taiwan independence separatist forces, and send a warning to external interference.
Despite China's disapproval, the US lawmakers' visit is seen as an important gesture of solidarity by Taiwan's officials. It also served as a reaffirmation of the US legal obligations to assist Taiwan in its self-defense.
In the future, I will promote the reform of the parliament, enhance national defense capability, and show the world the determination of the Taiwanese people to defend their homeland.
The situation over Taiwan remains tense, with no sign of de-escalation. But the US delegation's visit to self-governing island is a clear indication of the bipartisan support within the US Congress for the island's security and democracy.
So now, as always, it's time to examine the issue at hand in a little bit more detail. So, let's begin. Just as the incumbent President Lai Ching-te was offering cooperation, China decided to launch a series of military drills around Taiwan. And by drills, I don't mean your local fire drill. These were full-scale war games involving the Army, the Navy, Air Force, and Rocket Force as well. Because nothing says we're open to dialogue quite like a show of military might. China labeled these exercises as, and I quote, punishment for Lai's inauguration speech, which they claimed was another step towards Taiwan's formal independence. Beijing sees Lai as a separatist, and in their view, every word he utters about Taiwan's sovereignty is like nails on a chalkboard. Lai, however, stands firm, rejecting Beijing's claims of sovereignty and insisting that only the people of Taiwan can decide their future. Sounds logical, right? Now, while China was busy flexing its military muscles, a group of US lawmakers arrived in Taipei. This delegation, led by Republican Michael McCall, marks the first official visit since Lai took office. This visit undoubtedly added more fuel to the already blazing fire. China has always been really touchy about US interactions with Taiwan, viewing them as interference in what they consider a domestic issue. The presence of American politicians on the island is seen as a direct challenge to Beijing's claims, a bit similar to showing up at your ex's wedding uninvited and giving a toast. Now, meanwhile, China responded with an editorial in the Global Times calling Lai's speech vile behavior, filled with hostility and provocation. You know, the usual diplomatic pleasantries. Essentially, Lai Ching-te is playing a delicate balancing act, seeking to maintain Taiwan's sovereignty while also advocating for peace. A task about as easy as juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. In response to China's drills, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense placed its military on high alert, describing China's actions as irrational provocations. Now, this isn't the first time Taiwan has had to ramp up its defenses. Ever since Lai's predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, took office, China has been ramping up its military activities around the island, viewing Taiwan's pro-independence stance as a direct threat. So, what's at stake here? For China, it's about asserting its claim over Taiwan and demonstrating its readiness to use force if necessary. For Taiwan, it's about defending its democracy and maintaining its de facto independence. And for the United States, it's about supporting a democratic ally and countering China's growing influence across the region. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Martin Siebienia, Chief Economist at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So the situation in Taiwan, on a scale from 1 to 10, how serious do you think it has become during the last few days? Has it changed at all, in your view?
I think it has changed quite significantly because we are seeing a number of events or actions from the Chinese side that we have not seen before. So I would say it went up a notch or two, depending on how you see the scale, perhaps from 7 to 8, in my view. So it did become more dangerous. Perhaps I can list out a few reasons for why I see so. So first one is that until today, this is not the first time that China has launched such a blockade. But until today, all the blockades have been economic blockades, more like a trade blockade, embargoes, right? That the ships cannot go into Taiwan, planes cannot reach Taiwan. But it was not a full-scale military blockade until today. So this is really something that has changed this time. And so we see an increase in the tactics on the Chinese side. The other thing is also that China this time also focused on the outlying islands of Taiwan, right? So we have the main island of Taiwan, which is the focus usually, but also there are smaller islands scattered around island, some of them very close to the Chinese coast. And this time the drills also focus on those islands because from a Chinese perspective, these islands can be used as a stage for launching a counterattack on China in case of a military conflict. So the Chinese try to simulate how this would go. And the third part perhaps is that China also focused on the eastern coast of Taiwan. So the western coast of Taiwan faces China. Eastern coast is famously high mountains. It's like a redoubt, which should be easy to defend from the Taiwanese side, and the Chinese are now trying to see how they can approach from that end. So all three things considered, it really is quite a big shift this time, and I think we moved one gear higher up in the tension around the conflict.
And before we go into political implications of these dramatic events, would you say that these small islands are at all possible to defend? Just how fragile are they in terms of the military situation and the capacity of the Taiwanese authorities to maintain control over them, should China make a decisive move?
I think the Taiwanese have already given up on those islands. They're on the island of Kinmen, which is the closest to China. There used to be extensive defensive facilities, but they have been abandoned and turned into tourist spots, actually. There have been recently, perhaps a month or two ago, another incident when Chinese coastal patrol boats were harassing the Taiwanese ones. You see that the Chinese force is just several times harder than the Taiwanese, and it would be not feasible to defend those islands at all. And I do not think that the Taiwanese would in any way stage any counter-offensive from those islands. But I guess the Chinese want to be covered for all possibilities because they do not know exactly what's on those islands. But I do not think that the Taiwanese are able to use those islands for any purpose in case of an attack, and they would focus their defenses on the main island.
So since these drills have started, there has been an American delegation there going to Taiwan to send, a message of reassurance and so on. But in terms of China's intentions, would you say that this is about really testing their grounds for something more, a military action, or is it just trying to maintain political pressure from the very start on President Lai Ching-te? Which of these two is more likely, would you say?
I think both are true. I mean, more likely. So the latter ones, the political pressure on the newly inaugurated Taiwanese president, I think that is clearly the case because this is how the Chinese also justify or defended their actions, right? They said that he is a separatist, that he is an independence leader, that he does not respect one China principle, etc. Right?
And if I may, they also used very strong language there. They said that the defenders, the separatists, and I'm quoting from memory, so please do correct me if I'm wrong, are going to end up with their heads cracked and with blood flowing. I mean, this is not diplomatic language at all. Is it typical of China to insert this amount of violence into their communications with Taiwan? Or is it something new?
It is, but I would also caution against literal translations from Chinese because they often use Chinese idioms that are 1,000 or 2,000 years old. So we should take it maybe more metaphorically rather than literally. But although, on the other hand, one of the things I did not mention initially, but one of the parts of the drills was also trying to see what could be the potential escape routes of the politicians, or as they call them, the separatists or independence leader, out of Taiwan in case of a military attack. So they do definitely focus on maybe catching them or bringing them to justice, so to say, from a Chinese perspective. But back to your previous question, so certainly it is the personality of current Taiwanese president, who also used a little more confrontational language in his inaugurational speech, which the Chinese called despicable. Perhaps the major difference is that he used the word China to address China, which might sound weird, or it must sound actually natural that one would call China like that. But the thing is that that to the Chinese, it implies that Taiwan is not China, right? So the previous president, Tsai Ing-wen, she would never use the word China when addressing China. She would say Beijing authorities or the other side of the Taiwan Strait. So any type of language that does not imply that Taiwan and China are two separate entities. So we do see that also the Taiwanese president is kind of being a little bit more assertive to China. And this is how the Chinese justify the attack currently.
So how assertive do you think the United States is going to be? I mean, we've had this visit already, and previously there were statements suggesting the US Army would come to the defense of Taiwan, should there be any sort of Chinese aggression. And this is really interesting, of course, also in the context of what's going on in Ukraine, because with Ukraine, the United States always tries to exercise this restraint. Sometimes people are even saying there is too much of it, that they should be more strategically ambiguous towards Russia. China is also a nuclear power, but the United States doesn't seem to limit itself when it comes to the language. At least, I mean, we're not watching it as closely from this part of the world. Would you say that the United States are ready to intervene should there be any sort of Chinese attack on Taiwan? Will they follow up on what they said they might do?
Hard for me to judge if the Americans would follow up on their words, but I think there is a growing focus in Washington, D.C. on China, not only among the Republicans who've been saying it for a long time, but also Democrats. That the other thing is that the Americans are now getting thin, stretched too thin, generally because of the incidents also in the Middle East, not only Israel and Gaza, but also, say, the Yemeni attacks on ships, etc. Right? So there is the question of how the Americans would react. But so far, I think there is no doubt the Americans would come to some sort of help. The question is, even military help. The question is how much, right? If there is limited military help, can we? and how quick as well. Although there is a military base in Okinawa very close to Taiwan, so they could react very quickly, at least from there. And there are new military bases in the north of the Philippines, which is again across the strait from Taiwan, very close. So at least some American response could be extremely quick. But would that be sufficient for Taiwan, or would it be followed up with a more resolute response? That is questionable.
One thing that might be convenient for the US is that Taiwan is not a controversial partner the same way that Israel might be recently. I mean, Israel has taken a lot of bad rap for what they were doing in Gaza following the terrorist attacks in October last year. There was no doubt that this required a response, but now Israel is considered to be taking it a few steps too far when it comes to the densely populated areas in Gaza. So the US is, of course, also taking some criticism for supporting them. With Taiwan, it would be very clear-cut. Like, we're defending our ally against aggression. Do you think that Xi Jinping will still go for it, though? I mean, this is the moment that everyone fears. Like, our resolve to be tested. Like, what is it worth? Because if this fails, other, autocracies around the world will be emboldened. I mean, it's kind of similar to Ukraine, but also not, right? So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so would Xi Jinping go for it? That is an open question. I mean, people have been repeating the year 2027 as a year for the invasion, because it's been mentioned a few times by top Chinese politicians. It is also the 100 years anniversary of founding of the People's Liberation Army, so that is why the year was selected. The question is, wouldn't they bring it forward by a couple of years? And there's also other variables. One of the most important, perhaps, is the result of the elections in the United States that are going to take later this year. So the question is when they would do it, and actually, do they need to do it? Because there have been a couple of analyses published recently that are suggesting that China will not go for taking Taiwan by military force, but that they would force reunification by doing exactly what they did now, by doing military drills, embargoes, etc. So actions that will kind of wear the Taiwanese down, and they will eventually say, you know what, like, this is not worth it. Let's just unify with China. Let's just give in, because this is really leading us to have miserable lives, and we can't carry on like that. I'm not sure this will be the case, but a number of very respectable analysts are suggesting that, and this seems to be also a plausible option. Perhaps that the Taiwanese will not give up on their own, but they'll be worn down. China will sow discord in the society, etc., and the situation will be very untenable on Taiwan internally.
So propaganda, hybrid warfare, all that. I mean, this is a threat. It's less spectacular. So Taiwan would be like the frog being placed in slowly boiling water, right? It gradually becomes unaware of the fact that it is in danger. And after that, it could be too late. Well, hopefully we'll be seeing some decisive steps from the United States. I mean, this is what this is all predicated upon, like, a decisive response from allies. Martin Siebienia was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
And now we're moving on to Eastern Newsflash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. In a move against Russian disinformation, the European Union has imposed sanctions on the news website Voice of Europe, alongside businessmen Viktor Medvedchuk and Artem Marchevsky. The sanctions proposed by the Czech Republic aim to curb the spread of pro-Russian propaganda within the European Union.
The newly imposed sanctions include travel bans and asset freezes for individuals and the website, which have been identified as instruments of the Kremlin's disinformation campaigns. The Czech Foreign Ministry announced the sanctions on May 27th, highlighting the coordinated effort to protect European discourse from foreign manipulation. Viktor Medvedchuk, a former Ukrainian politician with close ties to Russian leadership, and Artem Marchevsky, a Ukrainian-Israeli businessman, have been specifically targeted due to their involvement with Voice of Europe. The website has been recognized as a channel for disseminating pro-Russian narratives and influencing public opinion in Europe. The sanctions followed the Czech Republic's earlier measures against the Prague-based company running Voice of Europe. The Czech government had previously accused the company of being a tool of Russian propaganda, leading to the EU-wide enforcement of restrictions.
On his third international visit since his inauguration for a new term, Russian leader Vladimir Putin has arrived in Uzbekistan. The visit underscores Russia's intent to deepen relations with the Central Asian nation.
Upon his arrival in the capital Tashkent, President Putin was received by his Uzbek counterpart, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. The leaders engaged in informal discussions, setting the stage for formal talks aimed at bolstering bilateral cooperation, particularly in trade and economic sectors. The Kremlin has highlighted the significance of this visit, emphasizing the shared interest of long-standing partnership between Russia and Uzbekistan. This diplomatic venture follows Putin's visits to China and Belarus, reflecting a strategic pattern of reinforcing alliances with neighboring countries. In China, Putin expressed support for proposals aimed at resolving the Ukraine conflict, while in Belarus, discussions included the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons.
Hungary is reportedly blocking the transfer of profits from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. This decision has significant implications for the EU's efforts to support Kiev amidst the ongoing war with Russia.
Hungary, known for its amicable relations with Russia, has been a consistent obstacle to initiatives aimed at aiding Ukraine or penalizing Russia since the latter's invasion in 2022. The current contention revolves around the utilization of profits generated from Russian assets that have been frozen across the EU. The European Union had previously reached a consensus on directing 90% of these proceeds into an EU-managed fund dedicated to military aid for Ukraine. However, Hungary's resistance is now jeopardizing the allocation of these funds, which are crucial for Ukraine's defense and recovery efforts. The frozen assets in question, estimated to be around 190 billion euros, are held in Euroclear, a Belgian central securities depository. EU officials had proposed a compromise to Hungary, suggesting that a portion of these funds earmarked by Brussels would not be used for weapon purchases for Ukraine. This deal was intended to persuade Hungary to lift its veto on the scheme. While Hungary has not outright vetoed the plan, it is delaying the process by withholding support for the necessary legislation.
Azerbaijan is sparing no effort to attract up to 1,200 students to study in Nagorno-Karabakh. The Azerbaijani president has allocated nearly $6 million to establish Karabakh University in Khankendi, the regional capital previously known as Stepanakert when it was controlled by ethnic Armenians.
Since September 2023 military offensive retook the territory, Baku has sought to repopulate and revitalize the region. Nearly 100,000 ethnic Armenians fled to Armenia following the offensive, leaving Khankendi largely deserted. In response, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev decreed the creation of Karabakh University in November 2023, appointing experienced university president to lead it. The Azerbaijani Science and Education Ministry announced that infrastructure work is underway, aiming to complete lecture halls, dormitories and other facilities by the fall. Karabakh University will offer free education, including tuition, room, board and laptops. Initially, 8 areas of study will be available, such as engineering, economics and tourism, with officials aiming for 1,200 students. The initiative is part of a broader effort to repopulate and develop the region.
And with this, Eastern Express comes to an end, at least this episode. Next one at the same time tomorrow, and for the time being, please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.